In the early morning of October 24th, Martin Risch would get up early to leave his house to head for an 8 a.m. flight to New York. The thing is, he had no idea that this would be the last time that he would see his wife. This is the story of Joan Risch. Joan Risch was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1930 to Harold and Josephine Bard. And by the age of 8, her family had moved to New Jersey, but in 1939, her parents died in what was described as a suspicious house fire. After the death of her family, Joan would be adopted by relatives. But Joan would later tell an acquaintance that she had been sexually abused as a child. Joan would graduate in 1952 from Wilson College in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. She had a degree in English literature. She would go to work in publishing, and she started as a secretary, but later moved up to supervising the secretarial pool. And eventually, she became an editorial assistant. But in 1956, she married an executive at one of the companies, Martin Risch, and she would leave work to raise a family with him. They would live in Connecticut, and the couple had their first children, Lillian, and then a son, David, in 1959. In April of 1961, they would move to Lincoln, Massachusetts, which was just outside of Boston. It appears that they really integrated into the community quite easily. Joan became active in the League of Women Voters, while Martin pursued his career with the Fitchburg Paper Company. And Joan kind of wanted to become a teacher after the children got older and went to school themselves. But all of that would change on the morning of October 24th. On the morning of October 24th, 1961, it was by all accounts a normal day for Joan. She got up, fed her children, and then she went with her 4-year-old daughter to the dentist, cashed a check, and did some shopping. She would return home for lunch at around 11 a.m., and then put her 2-year-old son in his crib for a nap, while her daughter played outside with a neighborhood boy. Apparently at around 1:55 p.m., Joan would take her daughter and the neighborhood boy to his parents' home and left them at the swing set in the yard, but she never said anything to the boy's parents. She would tell the children that she would be back and then went home. But around 2:15 p.m., a neighbor saw Joan standing next to her blue sedan outside the family residence. It appears that she was carrying something red, and she seemed to be dazed. Unfortunately, this is the last time anyone saw her again. Her daughter would come home from the neighbors at around 4 p.m., and then she would immediately run back to say that her mother was missing, and red paint covered the kitchen walls. That paint turned out to be O blood, which was Joan's type. The telephone had been ripped from Joan's kitchen wall and thrown into a wastebasket, and the wastebasket had been moved from the corner to the center of the room. A nearby telephone book was found open at the emergency number section. Even more sinister, there was a single bloody thumbprint on the phone mount, and 2 fingerprints and a partial palm print on the wall, and they were not belonging to Joan or her husband. Unfortunately, they've never been identified. Really, the only sign of a struggle was an overturned chair in the kitchen, and her son was still in his crib upstairs, undisturbed. It appears the blood trail led from the baby's room to the kitchen, and then outside to the driveway, where it stopped near her parked car. Blood drops were found on the hood and trunk of the car itself, but there were no bloody footprints inside the kitchen. And of course, there is no sign of Joan. Investigators would later determine that it seemed like about a pint of blood had been spread throughout the home. And it does seem that someone had made an effort to clean up the kitchen with paper towels and a pair of Joan's son's coveralls. After getting news of Joan's disappearance, witnesses reported seeing an unidentified dirty blue-gray 1954 or 1955 sedan parked behind Joan's car in the driveway at around 3:20 p.m. Drivers would also claim they saw a woman walking alongside the road where Route 128 was under construction later that day. Apparently, no one had stopped to assist the unidentified female, who was disheveled in appearance, and she looked dazed and confused and was holding something against her abdomen. Even more scary, blood had been running down the back of her legs. After those reports, the sightings of Joan stopped, and she has never been seen or heard from again. I just want to take a moment to say that people were driving by and they saw this woman clutching her stomach and she has blood running down her, and nobody stopped to offer aid or didn't go to the police or anything of the sort. It's just absolutely devastating. Of course, investigators would start with Joan's husband, Martin. Martin was in New York on October 24th for a business trip, and he had left early that morning. Although he was questioned by investigators, he was cleared of any involvement in her disappearance. I do have Martin's statement, so I'm going to read through it. I left my home in Lincoln at approximately 6:50 a.m. on October 24th, 1961. I went directly to Logan Airport driving my own car. I took the 8 a.m. flight from Eastern Airlines to New York City, LaGuardia Airport. I went to the West Side Terminal in the airport limo, made a couple of phone calls in local New York area, and then went to 42 West 15th Street to the office of BBM with some paper to be tested. I was with Arthur Kaufman. He tested the paper. We stayed in his office until about 12:45 when we went out to lunch. After lunch, we went back to his office. I left there about 2:45 p.m. I walked 3 or 4 blocks to the subway and took the subway to Grand Central Station. I then called the U.S. Plywood Corp. In Brewster, New York. I also made a couple of more local calls, window shopped for a while, and then went to the Hotel Commodore. I intended to stay overnight. Normally I stay at the Roosevelt, but it was full. Kaufman's secretary made the reservation at the Commodore for me. I checked into the hotel, read the paper, and then had dinner. I received a phone call from Mr. Larson, Concord, about 7 p.m. Then I called the state police at Concord, took a cab to LaGuardia, and here I am. My wife is the shy type. I know that she's had plans to go to the dentist in Bedford. I think the dentist's name is Anderson. Her normal procedure during the daytime was to feed the children at noon and then put the boy to bed. He usually slept till 2 p.m. The other children always went across to the neighbors. She never left the children alone. At times, if it was a nice day, she might take the children for a walk along the roadway. This was in a rare case as she was afraid of heavy traffic on our road. She has a friend in Bedford and also knows some people in the local area. Last night we had 1 drink apiece. As to the quart liquor bottle in the trash basket, I put it there because we finished it last night. We had some company over the weekend. They drank some beer. I can't explain the empty beer bottles in the basket in the kitchen. She usually emptied this basket when it was full. She had no regular pattern for getting rid of trash. She was in bed when I left this morning. She usually kept her pocketbook in the den closet. A blue car does not ring the bells with me. I can't recall anyone I know having a blue car. She was in good health and nothing was wrong with her. The damage to the car was from either her or I bumping off the garage doors. She was an excitable type of person. She might have let salesmen in the house to hear their stories. She found it hard to say no. I know that she had a salesman for Boys Town and some time ago. She took out a subscription for Field and Stream and sent it to Boys Town. She had no boyfriends. We have been married a little over 5 years and have always gotten along well. I do know that she would be fierce in defense of the children. There have been no people asking to take pictures of the children. There had been some talk of having a drywall put in, and she had contacted a couple of people. I know that she had seen Tebow Lincoln, Dud's Cleaners, from Concord, always comes on Tuesdays. There was a couple of suits in the kitchen for him to pick up. The Concord Dairy delivers our milk. The only outside activity she had was the Women's League of Voters. What's interesting about this statement is that line, the damage to her car was from either her or I bumping off the garage doors. She was an excitable type of person. The detectives did circle was. I'm sure they were curious about why he was using the past tense to describe his wife. Sergeant Mike McHugh of the Lincoln Police Department arrived at the house within 5 minutes of being called. He would talk briefly with Barbara Barker, who was the boy's mother, from across the road, and then he would head into the kitchen where he found those bloody smears on the walls, an overturned table, and the handset of the wall-mounted telephone ripped loose and thrown in the wastebasket. At first, he believed that Joan may have committed suicide. So they searched the house for her body, which of course they didn't find. So of course, as they're going through all of the details of Joan's life, they come to her library records. And this is where the case gets quite fascinating. Authorities will learn that Joan checked out over 25 library books during the previous summer, and all of them had been related to murder or unexplained disappearances. But her husband would describe her as an avid reader who enjoyed suspense stories. And apparently one of those books that dealt with this mysterious disappearance included an account of a staged disappearance where some of the details happened to match what happened in Joan's home. And I think people really get hung up on this idea that Joan perhaps staged her own disappearance, but I really don't think so. If anybody were to read my selection of material of books, had I gone missing, they would think maybe the same thing. She had a lot of books about, women being abducted or women staging their disappearance. I simply think that she really just liked to read mystery stories, and unfortunately something awful happened to her. And if she were to stage her disappearance, why did she have such a busy day? She went to the dentist, she had to do some shopping in town, the milkman was coming by, the dry cleaning man. She was really just living an ordinary day. Why would she put her children in harm's way? She left one toddler sleeping in his crib, and then she ditched the other at the neighbor's without even telling the neighbor. and as her husband said, she was fiercely protective of her children. Some people believe that Joan had a boyfriend or a lover, and really that just kind of, I think, came from message boards online from an individual claiming to be her former neighbor. Apparently, there are accounts stating that a two-tone car had been seen in her driveway the day of her disappearance and sometime that previous week, which doesn't really necessarily imply that it was a lover. It truthfully could have been a salesperson. It could have been anybody, somebody picking up dry cleaning, somebody dropping off a product. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that she was having an affair, and her husband didn't believe she was either. And the older of Joan's children, the one that she took across the street, she could have certainly reported that her mother was with a friend or had an acquaintance over. But what's really important is the bloody fingerprints and the palm print do indicate that another individual was present during this incident. And perhaps this man that did assault her was familiar to her. Maybe she knew him. Maybe he was an acquaintance. Or maybe it was just some random person who decided to harm her. The last time that Joan was seen by her neighbor, which was through trees, the neighbor stated that Joan was walking with her arms held out in front of her. Of course, the neighbor thought she was just maybe playing a game with her children, but after finding out that Joan disappeared, that seems really sinister. Perhaps was she blindfolded and she was walking that way to try to, clearly not fall, or she couldn't see, obviously, if she's blindfolded, so she's trying to keep her balance. She's blindfolded, she's going to keep her arms out to make sure that she's not walking into objects. Some speculate that Joan didn't lock her house up when she went out that morning to run errands, and that perhaps a stranger was in the home waiting for her that afternoon when she returned. People also believe that perhaps Joan had a home abortion and that it went terribly wrong. Some say that perhaps the beer bottles were used to make it less painful, and then Joan panics, she tries to call for help. Perhaps the person that was helping her with this abortion rips the phone from the wall. And remember, when Joan was seen that day, she had blood down her legs and she was clutching at her stomach. Perhaps that open phone book was her calling for help, calling 911 or whatever their situation might have been in the 60s so that she could get help for this botched abortion. The person perhaps performing the abortion got scared because it was illegal and ripped the phone off the wall. I also think the statement of Barbara F. Barker, the neighbor that was taking care of Joan's children when she went to the dentist and then her daughter later that day, is really important, so I'm going to read that. Barbara would say, "I saw Joan this morning. I took care of her 2-year-old son while she went to the dentist at Bedford. She brought the baby over at about 9:30 a.m. and she came back around 10:55 a.m. She then took her children home. My 4-year-old son Douglas went over to their home to play with Lillian. When Doug came back, he said that they played outside. Joan was cutting the grass in the back. That afternoon, her 4-year-old daughter came over after saying that she had permission from her mother to come to my house. I saw Joan about 2:30 p.m. I saw her run beside her car. She had a trench coat on at this time. I saw something red. I thought that she was chasing a child and the child was wearing a red jacket. She was running with her arms outstretched. Later, I saw her walking back towards the house. She has lived here since last April. She is very level-headed. She is not the type to have a man visit her when her husband is away. To the best of my knowledge, she did not have any feminine trouble or any hemorrhaging. I took 4-year-old Lillian across the street about 3:45 p.m. Then I went to Concord to do some shopping. I came back around 4:15 p.m. Lily came in and said that I can't find mommy. David's in bed and the place is messed up. I went across the street and found blood all over the kitchen. I went upstairs and found David in bed in the little room facing north towards the street. She never leaves the children alone. She was not at all moody. I know that she lived in Ridgefield, Connecticut before moving here. She is not a heavy drinker. She's a social drinker only. She was always very attentive to the children. The only chum she had that I know of is a person from Bedford who she had gone to school with. She was not the aggressive type, not a recluse, but not the type to go looking for friends. It seemed to me that when she ran to the car, she went back to the house again. I did see something red. That was about 2:15 p.m. She's about 5'5", 110, short dark brown hair, blue eyes, attractive, medium complexion, and about 30 years old. When I last saw her, she was wearing a tan trench coat, flat shoes, possibly ballet tights. She did very little entertaining. I do know that she has a friend in Bedford who had a baby a few days ago. I really don't know what else I can tell you. Although there seems to be a wealth of information, mostly like fingerprints, palm prints, there's blood. There's probably blood of the murderer in that home, but again, it was the 60s, so DNA non-existent. But they did have fingerprints and a palm print, so I wonder if they ever run that through the system now, though I fear it might be too late to really determine who did this crime. I'd really love to know your guys' thoughts on this case. There's so many theories out there. What do you think happened to Joan? But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. I'll be back next week with another video, and I'll see you then.